everyone, my name is Simran Bhatia and I'm a staff writer for The Profile. Today, I got to have a special conversation with Chad Mumm. He is the executive producer for Netflix's latest sports docu-series, Full Swing. Full Swing is about golf rookies and champions as they play across the world throughout the year. Chad is also the chief creative officer of Vox Media Studios, which has produced shows like the Explained series on Netflix, Mind Over Murder on HBO, and Chefs vs. the Wild on Hulu. Chad and I dove into all things golf. We talked about the controversial LIV Golf drama, his favorite players on the show, and women in golf. But we also talked about his creative process and what it takes to make a show like Full Swing. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of passion and grit. Make sure to subscribe to The Profile for interviews just like this one, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me today, Chad. Appreciate it. I am really excited for us to get into all things Full Swing, but also, your creative process, all the other projects that you work on with Vox as well. So to just jump right into things, you are very obviously from your Twitter profile, an avid golf fan. So what got you into golf and what inspired you to make a show about it?
So I've been playing golf sort of as long as I can remember. I guess I could say that I come from a golf family. I'm a military brat, so I moved around a lot as a kid. But my dad was in the Air Force, and every Air Force base has, there's a runway and a golf course. The joke is that those are the two most important things to build when you're building a new Air Force base. My dad got into golf when I was a little kid, and then my grandfather actually also was an avid player. He was also an Air Force pilot. And my earliest memory of my granddad would be to going and visiting him, and he had a shop in his garage where he would build clubs for his friend. He was kind of like a tinkerer, and he'd do like re-grip clubs for people and put new shafts in, and just like the smell of like the mineral spirits from re-gripping a golf club and like the sound of him sawing down shafts, like it's the kind of one of the earliest memories I have of my grandpa. It was like centered around golf. And so I started playing when I was 6 years old. I lived in Northwest Florida at this military golf course. And I went and did like a summer camp for a week and like learned how to hit the ball. And I finished the week with a little 6-hole golf tournament. My dad was out watching me, and I somehow like won the tournament and made this putt on the last hole to win the thing. And after playing golf for like 6 days, and I was hooked for the rest of my life. For me, golf's always been there. And I played as a kid, and then throughout high school, I played competitively as like a junior. It was always kind of knew I wasn't good enough to be a pro. But when I was a freshman, that's when Tiger, really exploded onto the scene.
Yeah.
I was on the golf team, and I became like obsessed. So I would watch every golf tournament I could, and read every magazine and every book, and work. My first job was at a golf store. And so for me, doing this show has been kind of a labor of love and a passion project, because I feel like golf's given me so much. And so to finally get to bring that all together and make a show that kind of introduces this world and this game to like millions and millions of people who maybe had a preconceived notion about what they thought of when they think of golf. But to kind of subvert that expectation and show people how captivating it can be is really like a dream come true.
So actually, since you've been interested in, the sport of golf for such a long time, and you've also been, chief creative officer for Vox for some time now, I'm surprised that you didn't create a show like Full Swing earlier in your career. So why did you choose to produce it now rather than much earlier?
Well, I tried. I've been trying for close to 9 years to make it made. I think it, like anything, it's all about timing and having, being at the right place, the right time, having the right relationships. I first met the PGA Tour kind of executive team that oversees their media partnerships back in 2012. So we went down to the tour's headquarters and we pitched them on like a partnership with Vox Media to do a bunch of golf stuff. And one of the ideas was a doc series following PGA Tour players kind of on and off the golf course. And we ended up not getting the business, which was like a crushing blow. But they knew that, they could tell that I was like a real fan of and a real golfer, And so we stayed in touch, and I became friends with the execs who were in that meeting from the tour. I kept seeing them, and back in 2016, I pitched them again and said, I think now's the time. Let's do like our hard knocks. And the tour was they love the idea, but they're like, it's just not going to happen internally. Like we just can't get the buy-in. Fast forward, 2 more years of seeing them and kind of pitching it again. And our
Okay.
studio had
Very
taken off.
persistent, very persistent.
Well, I loved it, and again, like I said, it's all about timing. And so, the studio had really exploded in that from sort of 2015 to 2019. And we were making shows for Netflix and Hulu and HBO and Apple and had won some, Emmys and like had really emerged as like a real nonfiction powerhouse in Hollywood. And we played golf at Shadow Creek, which was like the hardest golf course to get on. I get the invite, we go play Shadow Creek, and I bring it back up again. And the big difference this time was a couple months earlier, the PGA Tour got a new commissioner. So Jay Monahan got promoted up to being commissioner of the tour. And I think, in the Jay regime, they were more open to look at something like this. So over that course of that round, we kind of hashed out what it would need to look like, and we had a deal. And so I had the rights to make a documentary series on the PGA Tour and started to go to players and ask them to be a part of it. And then, from 2019 into 2020, we added the majors, so we had Augusta, and then we got the rest of the governing bodies on board. And COVID happened, which actually in some ways was probably the best thing that could have happened to this project, because, the golf governing bodies, which are, there's the PGA Tour, which runs the professional league and runs all their tournaments. But then there's like the four majors, and the four majors are run by different organizations. They're not run by the PGA Tour. Historically, like they don't collaborate on content together. They kind of have their own turf. And but because of COVID, they had to kind of come together and remake the golf calendar, because golf was actually the first professional sport to be back on the air. They were like already at the table together, and so it really primed the pump for them to kind of all throw in together and say, okay, we're going to collaborate for sort of the first time in history on like a content project. And it was this show. And then the other big break that happened is about a month into COVID, a little show called Drive to Survive season 2 came out. and because everybody was stuck at home, like devouring everything on Netflix, that show really exploded in popularity. And I think season 1 like did okay, but season 2 was when it really like emerged as a phenomenon.
Correct.
And so, so that kind of was like, oh my God, now we have this thing to point to about what this can look like. And it really put some wind in our sails. So then Netflix got involved. I ended up meeting with the team that makes Drive to Survive. From there, like the rocket was lit, and fast forward to February 15th this year, the show premieres, and I guess the rest is history. We're making season 2 right now. So
that's amazing. One thing that you mentioned was about how you started going to players to, bring them aboard. I'm wondering, how receptive were the players to the idea of a Netflix show, and what was it like getting them to agree to interviews? Because I'm sure there might have been some people who were like, nah, I don't want to be in the spotlight like that. And then others were probably like, yes, let's go, let's rally around it. So what was that process like?
First thing to know, the PGA Tour works for the players, not the other way around. So pro golf is kind of different from other major leagues like the NFL or the Major League Baseball, in that like the commissioner of the tour like works for the members, which is the players. The tour was really like, we can introduce you to agents, but we really can't make the players do anything. So you've got to go like convince them. And originally, before Netflix got involved, there were a handful of players. The first player to say yes was Ricky Fowler. And, Ricky is very forward thinking in terms of media. And he had a production company that he started called Main Event Productions. And they had made a series or partnered on a series, a basketball show for Netflix. So he was already kind of thinking about Hollywood. And to this day, like go to a PGA Tour event and you're going to see dozens of like 12-year-old kids with like orange shirts on and orange Puma hats because of Ricky Fowler. So, he has a real connection with the fan base. And so he was the first player to say yes, which was great. And once Ricky was on board, we added like Justin Thomas and Tony Finau and a player named Cameron Champ. And from there, that was kind of our core. And then we sort of built out from there. So I think there was a little bit of like, okay, well, Ricky's doing it. He's always been comfortable with cameras. But then when JT said yes and Tony said yes, I think it was like, there was a little bit of a groundswell of like, okay, this is going to be something. And then Drive to Survive like blew up. So half the PGA Tour like was stuck during COVID. They watched it too. And so then they were like, oh, this is going to be like that. Like, that's cool. Like, I want my sport and this thing I've dedicated my life to, getting better at. I want that to get the treatment of the rock and roll, like race car, fiery explosions kind of male soap opera thing. So they were into it. And I think that, they also understood the potential opportunity to grow their audience beyond just hardcore golf fans. But we're not paying the players, so they had to opt in. Every player has full kind of control of the access that they grant. They don't have editorial control. They don't get to look at cuts. They don't get to say what we can include and can't include. But because we're not paying them, they kind of can pull out. Like they could change their mind and say, you know what, I'm done. And then they're not going to be in the show, and we're just not going to have anything. So for us, we just kind of had to show up and build trust, so they could understand that we were really not the media. Like we weren't going to tweet something the next day. There is a golf media bubble, and that like they're surrounded by reporters, and there's a lot of tweets and a lot of like breaking news, and they're very guarded because of that. And so I think that for us, we started off the conversation by saying, no matter what happens on this show, audiences aren't going to see it for a year or 9 months.
Yeah.
And even if they do, and it's a moment where you've just lost the biggest tournament in your life and you're upset, we're going to have a year's worth of context around that moment. It's not going to be taken out of context. And we're going to be able to show how you came back from that. And so you've got to be able to let us in even in those kind of lowest points.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge trust building exercise that doesn't take place overnight, probably took place over the course of several months. You did touch on a few things about Drive to Survive success. I'm wondering, did you ever feel any pressure to live up to the success of such a hit show like Drive to Survive? And how did you measure impact or compare impact?
Oh God, yeah. That was the high bar we had to clear. And I always felt like it was unfair to our show to have that be the model, because Drive to Survive literally changed a sport forever, and created so much value for Formula One and introduced it to millions and millions of people who are now like going to races. There's multiple races in the US now. I mean, you've seen the impact that's been written about ad nauseum.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was a bit unfair for us, because like that's like a generational kind of show. You just don't get a hit like that ever, and that may be a once in a lifetime thing. So I did my best to kind of try to downplay that, like that's what we don't compare us to Drive to Survive. It's going to be its own thing. But it turns out that like it did come out like that, and it was it has very similar reach and impact, and you're starting to see the ratings for the Masters were up, and the ratings for the most recent tournament, the RBC Heritage, was way up, and I can't imagine that our show had nothing to do with that. And so, I'm very proud that we can even stand like shoulder to shoulder with Drive to Survive.
As a creative officer, though, you mentioned something about hit shows, but you've also produced several other shows on Netflix. What has to be true about a show or a film for it to be a hit in your experience?
I think that one of the key tenets, though, for the shows that really have broken out is they've always had a really unique moat around them creatively. And for Full Swing, the moat was our unprecedented access. And nobody had ever gotten that access, ever. It wasn't like this was it come out a couple of years ago, it didn't work, and now we're trying it again. I mean, nobody had ever been in the places that our cameras were in. Nobody had ever been at home with these players. For other shows we've made, like Explained, which is, has been a very popular show on Netflix and was kind of our first like hit show, that had a format that was completely novel. It was short documentaries, 20 to 25 minutes long, that took you all the way deep on a topic that you might be really curious about, but that you didn't necessarily feel like watching a 90-minute movie about. And you get that little dopamine rush of like, I understand this thing now. And then we bring you back, and then we feed you another one. And it didn't involve having to invest the 90 minutes into like a documentary about it. You could just do 25 minutes and then boom, the next one, and do the next one. The barrier to entry as a viewer was like, oh, I'm curious about cryptocurrency, or I'm curious about female orgasm, or I'm curious about, credit cards, or on and on and on. And then just like pay it off. So you've got to find that creative moat. And what we always say when we're developing shows that we're going to pitch is, if there's anyone else in the world who could do this, do it with them. That's like the chip we have on our show. That's the bar we have to hit. We want every project that we take out we are the only people in the world who could make it. And so I say to our teams and to myself all the time, like, how do we build a moat around a project? And that could be a creative moat, that could be an access moat, that could be IP. But how do we make it where we're the only people in the world who could really deliver this?
I want to pivot into all the hot button topics that came out of the show. You might see this question coming, but for the listeners and viewers who may not know, there's been a hot controversy in golf for a little over 2-3 years now about a new golf league joining called LIV Golf. And it has like 12 teams, 48 players. It's supposed to be the more action-packed version of golf. So I'm curious, is Netflix or Vox neutral in the debate between like LIV Golf versus PGA? Is there any neutrality there, or are you picking sides to make it juicy?
Well, we had no idea that was coming. And so, of course, it's hard to talk about season one without talking about the rise of LIV Golf and the kind of rivalry with the PGA Tour. What ended up happening was we had committed to a lot of players. As I said, we had 28 players signed up for season one, and we were filming with them all year, and we had gotten deep access, and a handful of those players left in the middle of the season to go to LIV. And what we had told the tour and what we had told those players is that if it's important to you, it's important to us. We're not going to take a side. We're going to tell your story with authenticity. If you let us in, you're going to get something out of it. And we're going to basically tell your story of your year back to you and back to the viewers. So we didn't take a side. Our first thought was this is going to ruin our show because we're going to lose access to people because they're going to leave. There's all kinds of lawsuits. Everyone's going to clam up. Nobody's going to want to talk about this. That was a short-lived feeling because it became also very obvious that now we have this unprecedented controversy in a sport that I would argue is maybe unprecedented in the history of any pro sport. I mean, there's certainly been breakaway leagues in basketball and football, and there was an attempt to do this in professional soccer in Europe, but that never happens during the season, while players are still in the same locker room and competing against each other. It was wild. And very quickly, we also realized, well, actually, maybe this is going to be like good for us and not good for golf. Certainly, I would argue it's probably, it's created a lot of ugliness in general around the sport, but certainly from a narrative perspective, it gave a macro urgency to like everybody's story, and there was real controversy in a sport that is pretty gentlemanly and pretty convivial. Like the professionals there, it's like the way I describe the life on the PGA Tour. It's kind of like being in high school. Like there's little cliques, but you're kind of all like when you're a senior in high school, everybody remembers, like you kind of run the campus, and everything's familiar. You've been in that cafeteria your whole high school career. You kind of know the drill. That's kind of what it's like being on the tour. It's the same kind of people week in and week out. The same sort of setups, you've been to the same places over and over. And there's there may not be friendship across all of it, but there's sort of a general appreciation of like, hey, we've gotten here, like we made it to this thing. And all of a sudden you inject this really critical question about like, what are you here for? Are you here for legacy? Are you trying to win golf tournaments? Are you trying to write golf history? Or is this a job to you? And are you comfortable with sort of the moral questions that arise around the source of this funding of this league? And, we didn't have to ask the questions of the players like the media did out of the gate. And all of a sudden you've got, I'm in the press building and it's not just Golf Digest and golf.com and No Laying Up. It's like Bloomberg and CNN and like the New York Times who are there because this is all of a sudden a geopolitical question. And all of a sudden these players who were used to their press conferences, talking about like what club they hit on number 7 and the missed putt they made to miss the cut, like that transitioned into like questions about the existential threat to the game and what you were really doing it for, which just made for a fascinating kind of backdrop to build a show around. And I think that we were really fair to both sides. I think we presented the case on either side, and we certainly had access to players that I think audiences, and I would say like really felt justified in their decision. I think about somebody like Dustin Johnson, who, I was extremely transparent about his rationale for leaving, and it's hard to argue against it. It's sort of, you may disagree, but at least he is confident in his decision. And there was sort of no equivocation about it for him. It's a job and he was going to get paid more to play less. So
one thing that we noticed, it was all male players that were tracked across PGA, but Breakpoint, for example, does a great job of giving equal screen time to the female tennis players as well as the male tennis players and tracking their stories. So is there a plan for Full Swing to start tracking female golf professionals in future seasons? Do you think there's an opportunity there for Full Swing to explore that?
I would love to do that. The women professionals are unbelievably good. And there's, I'm, as a diehard golfer, I'm like obsessed with golf Twitter. And there's this like undercurrent of golf Twitter, not in like the professionals of people who know, but like, I don't know, bros on golf Twitter who just like think they could go beat the women like as like a hacker. I don't know, it's sexist and misogynistic, but like they are so good. It's unbelievable. And you'd ask some of these PGA Tour players, I think, that there are women out there that are better iron players than they are, better putter than they are. They may not hit it as far, but like they are blown away by their game and they see it up close. And if you ever get a chance to go to a women's event, like a LPGA Tour event, you should, because it's like mind blowing how precise and how good they are. So I think the first question, to answer your question, I think I would love to do that. I think that there is an inherent challenge that's different in professional golf than in tennis, in that like there are no shared events. There's been some attempts to do that. There's an event in Australia, the Australian Open, that's a mixed event. That's one event, the whole year. And then they're going to be doing a new event this year at the end of the season called the Grant Thornton Invitational, that's going to pair up a PGA Tour player with an LPGA Tour player, which will be, one of those events. And we hope to highlight that as a way to kind of introduce the women into the sport. From a production standpoint, it would be really hard to weave the LPGA into Full Swing, because you would essentially have to double the size of the production budget, because we would have to be at 2 events every weekend instead of 1, and we'd be in totally different cities on totally different schedules. So it's my hope in season 2 to introduce some of the women players. I think it deserves to be its own show.
That would be amazing. And I would 100% watch that the day it comes out in its entirety. A piece of feedback that I saw online and in talking to other people about the show is that there's a lot of golf fans and viewers of the show that have expressed a desire to hear the conversation between a player and the caddy, like on the green. And they want to see how strategy gets adjusted in real time. What kind of creative decisions did you make specifically for the structure of the show that you thought would resonate really well with the audience, and what more do you think could you do there?
So I definitely think we heard that feedback from season 1, and our hope in season 2 is to give even more of that kind of on-course strategy elements that we can kind of rip from Drive to Survive, because certainly those conversations are happening. For us, the key creative thesis of the show was that it's not about the tournaments, it's about the characters. And ultimately, the goal is to make you empathize, whether you're falling in love with them or not, but like really get inside the curtain of a character, of a player. And the way that you do that is obviously you meet them, you see them off the course, but you also hear from like the important people in their life, whether it's their spouse or their caddy or their coach or their friends. And you get that different perspective in a way that just doing an interview with the player won't give you. And you use that to kind of build a story that's character focused. These shows aren't going to be effective if they're just recaps of what happened. They have to introduce a new human element, and they've got to make you care about what happens on the course by using the off the course stuff to create a character and bring you on their journey. And I think people ask me a lot, like, what's your favorite episode of Full Swing? And they're all, I think I could make arguments for all of them, but to me, episode 5, which is the US Open episode with Matt Fitzpatrick and Dustin Johnson, I think is like probably the most complete version of that narrative. The journey that Matt Fitzpatrick goes on in that 40 minutes is like, you could teach a screenwriting class about it. You meet him, you establish who he is, where he comes from, you see these obstacles that are in his way. I still get chills like thinking about that in the show. I watched it 1,000 times, giving notes on it when we were cutting it. It's still it works so well.
Everybody watching Full Swing, I think, had some sort of anticipation for when are we going to get to see Tiger? Like, is he going to sit for an interview? Is it going to be next episode? So I'm wondering, did you feel like we need someone like Tiger, who is in a lot of ways like the face of golf for the past, however many years? did you feel the pressure to have Tiger? And when you weren't able to get that access, did you feel like you had lost some part of your vision, or do you feel like you don't need someone like Tiger for a show like Full Swing to be successful in the way that it is?
Well, I think that we've already answered the second question, which I don't think you need Tiger to make a show like this successful.
Yeah.
And then I also think that there's a risk with Tiger that he would become the whole show because he is such a monolith. And Tiger is one of the most interesting sporting figures in history ever. There's nobody like Tiger. I would put him up with Muhammad Ali and Michael Jordan, and like that's it pretty much. Secretariat maybe, like who completely transfixed the entire planet and turned them into fans and got them to tune in. And so the risk with having someone like Tiger, again, he didn't give us that access, so it's not like I said like, Tiger, we don't want you, but you would risk like overpowering all these other stories. What was really interesting too is like Tiger has really become a father figure for a lot of these players. And so the way that we wanted to treat him in the show was more like a fulcrum around which like some of these characters' stories pivoted. So for Tony Finau and for Colin Morikawa, like they're playing golf because of Tiger, and for different reasons. Like Tony, he says it in the episode, when he saw Tiger win the Masters in 1997, he's like, oh, there's someone who looks like me and he's playing golf. Like maybe I can do that. And then for Colin, he took Tiger's work ethic and kind of perfectionism and commitment to like getting better constantly, and said like, if that's the bar that I got to hit, like I'm already a really good golfer, but I got to take it to another level. Like I see what this guy's doing, and I'm gonna learn from that. And so he had such an impact on everybody. And to be honest, when we started making this show, the first thing we did was we brought in a bunch of players. I think we did 12 interviews in 2 days, and we were down at Tiger's event, of course, it's Tiger's event in the Bahamas. And there's a recording studio right next to the golf course. It's kind of this like in this resort area, and there's this really hip recording studio there. So we set up in the studio, we brought in all these players, and we did our first interviews. And every single one of them, the first thing they said, the reason why I play golf is because of Tiger. And we didn't prompt them to say that. It was like, hey, how did you get into golf? Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods, Tiger Woods. And then pressing on it, they all sort of took different things from the Tiger story. But make no doubt about it, he's the reason why they were there. In the 8th episode, Rory McIlroy wins the tour championship, and he's the closest thing, probably in some ways to Tiger that we've had. So in some ways, kind of an heir apparent, generational player, Hall of Fame player, and Rory gets a text from Tiger in the locker room, like right as he's basking in his win, and you just like see his face change to like being 12 years old again. And getting a text from your hero. It was so authentic that you couldn't script that or force that, and just to kind of see the shift in his body language when he sees the text. It's like, it's a powerful scene. And that's Tiger. Like that's the Tiger that we know and that we saw and that we got to see through the player's eyes. So, even though he's not interviewed, I think you feel him.
It's very obvious through this whole conversation that you're very passionate about golf, and you've had this vision of what the show should look like, and you've been pitching it for so many years. So as a leader of, the creative team at Fox Media Studios, how do you rally a group of individuals like your creatives who are on your team? How do you rally them around your vision, and what does that creative process look like?
You have to believe in it, always. And we've made a lot of shows. I think we've had 50 plus series that we've premiered in the last sort of 5-6 years. And every one of those shows, whether it's me or it's one of my execs on my team, like we believe in it, like to our core, because it's hard. Making a television show or a film is really difficult work. And by the way, it doesn't matter the budget. Like a $15 million show is just as difficult as $1 million show. And you have to love it. You have to buy in and you have to care. And I think like the good news is we don't have to sell 1,000 television shows to have a really good business, good creative business. And that means we can really bet on stuff that we believe in. And so that's sort of the first thing is how does it get on? How does a project go from an idea to getting onto our slate? It's like, well, we've got to have a champion. We've got to have someone who lives and breathes it. And like, there's a drive beyond just like the financial component of like making this thing. It's like, it has to exist. in the world, and you're not going to rest until it's out there. And I think like, being a creative person myself, like that's always the best sales strategy, because like if you don't believe in it, then how could you convince someone else to buy it? I learned something really early-ish in my career from Ezra Klein, who was my executive producer partner on Explain. The way I describe it is like it just falls out of him. Like he can just literally go off and in 20 minutes like write something, and it feels like it comes out fully formed on the page. Like he can't help himself. It just it's like there in the ether, and he's just finding it, and it just flows, and it's like he has to create. It's sort of it's not, I mean, I'm sure he would say it's hard and it takes a lot of work, which it does, but it just falls out of him. And that's where like you are around creative people who are like the real talent in the creative side. Like they all have that in common. It just falls out of them. And for me, this show fell out of me. Like this is my passion, and I can talk about it at length because it was always there, and it just falls out. You've got it. It has to exist. That's why I fought for 9 years to make it. People want to be on a team that has a mission, and if the leader of that team is like believes in it with all their heart and is gonna make those sacrifices to make it real, that's fun work. That's why we're not accountants.
To dig deeper into, once you have the idea and once you have people on your team and they're on board, how do you draw inspiration for what the structure of a show or a film should be like? Like outside of Full Swing, the plethora of other shows that you have, is there like mood boarding that takes place, or are there books that are read, or people reference other shows? Obviously for, Full Swing, we know other Netflix docu-series were inspirations for some of the structure of the show, but what kind of inspirations or people do you speak to decide on what a show should even look like what the end product should look like, and how are you going to get there?
Being a producer or working in this business, like it gives you a chance to do a lot of different things and to kind of get excited and curious about a lot of different things. We do a lot of different stuff. Sometimes we'll make Bibles, we write a lot. We do a lot of like try to get it into words, what we're trying to do. We'll mood board things, not so much like, mood boarding, like we're not making Pinterest boards, but we'll pick like aesthetically what we want to do. There's a lot of YouTube clips being shared around. I could say that there's Explained, the style and tone of Explained was really, really influenced by I think 2-minute long YouTube video that was like a short biography of John Baldessari, the artist, that came out in like 2008, and it's on YouTube somewhere. Like that style, that like 2-minute video, like really inspired Explained. And you could look it up and you see it and you'd be like, oh yeah, that feels like Explained. But we watched that like 100 times when we were putting that show together.
Wow.
And it's just like a random video that some artist made, some art kid made about John Baldessari. And so yeah, the inspiration kind of can come from anywhere. And part of the fun of the process is you get to build a team, and you're surrounded by creative people who all have their own ideas, and they're all bringing their own references, and they're thinking through the tone and the style, and they're everybody's pushing each other to kind of elevate things. We do reading. We do a lot of reading. We had a show that came out on HBO this summer called Mind Over Murder, which was about 6 people in Nebraska who confessed to a crime that they didn't commit. And it really was about the nature of memory and what is truth. And that was an article that we read in the New Yorker. Like one of our execs read it in the New Yorker and became obsessed with it. And in that case, like the rights to that article had been sold off. And he was so passionate about it that he went to Nebraska and just like didn't leave until he had met all the people involved in the story and kind of signed them up to our project. Because, we had the access to the actual people, and he was obsessed enough with it that he was able to pull it all together and get people to trust him in that community. And then we had our Moat, we might not have had the article, but we had the people that were the principal characters. So, it could come from anywhere, kind of the inspiration, and the passion. And the fun of it is that you kind of, when you jump into any of these projects for the first time, you kind of never know where it's going to lead.
You recently tweeted this like unknown fact about like a fresh egg or a fresh ball going farther on a play than an older ball. So through the shooting of Full Swing, what were some random interesting things that you learned throughout filming the show? And it could be about golf, but in general, maybe it could have been about filming a show and getting players.
I think the one of the first things that I learned, professional athletes, the first time you interview them, if you put the cameras on them and you put the lights in the room, like they're going to clam up and kind of go into like their media training mode, and they all kind of have talking points, and it's really easy for them. They do interviews after every round, for the most part, and there's media in their face all the time. They do a lot of TV interviews, but it's all kind of in the context of competition. And so if you look like those interviews, then you're going to get those kind of interviews. And so what I love about what Box to Box does, they've learned over the course of many years of making, sports docs with big name athletes, is that the first interview, we don't even film it. We just record it with audio. And it's like a podcast almost, where there's just a mic on there, lav, and they forget it's there. And we ask them to come in street clothes, and and we sit in comfortable chairs, and we just sort of talk. And all of a sudden you blink and it's been an hour and a half, and you've gotten to know them as a person, and they're not just giving their talking points. So that was like a really kind of bold, and I thought, you've got limited access to people, and you're going to blow one of them and not even be able to use it on camera. But it shows you the real story. It introduces you to the real person. And that was like that's a brilliant idea. And I think like something that I'll take on the rest of my career and do. On the golf side, I think that like the thing that I learned that was fascinating, besides that all the tour players are using really fresh golf balls, and like the performance degrades pretty quickly after they come out. And I don't even know if the ones you're buying in the golf stores, like if they're as hot as the ones that are out there on the tour. But that's kind of neither here nor there. I mean, to me, it's just like the margin of difference between a player who's like top 10 and like 250th in the world is like one shot per round. And so they're all so close every time. And you just never know when like a decision is going to matter, and like every shot counts the same, it's all one stroke. And so like a lazy thought on a Thursday in round one, you're playing, you tee off at 8 a.m, it's overcast or cold, you get lazy on one swing, you're mentally not there, and you end up making a bogey. Like that could be the difference in making the cut or missing the cut, or winning the golf tournament or losing it. And it's like to think about the pressure of being able to like get yourself up for, 144 shots or however many it is, over the course of 4 rounds, and commit fully to each one of them is just mind blowing to me. And I'm lucky. I love to play golf. It's like, I'm lucky if I can concentrate on 10 shots around, and imagine doing that for 4 days with crowd surrounding you and people cheering and distractions, blimps flying overhead. Like it's amazing, like the mental strength. And I think that's also why golf is such a great canvas for human storytelling, because it is like the loneliest sport. In golf, like you could play 4 rounds of the best golf of your life and just get beat by somebody, like that just happens to get hotter or got a good break when you got a bad break. And like, and you're playing against the entire field that anybody could win. It is really taxing emotionally and mentally. And I think that golf's a sport that you don't win that often. And so imagine also like being around professional athletes, and I've been lucky to be around a lot of pro athletes. Like, most athletes don't like mentally can't handle like winning like 2% of the time. Like these are athletes that are prone to winning. Like they've won their whole life. You're a football player. Imagine like how satisfied you'd be if you're a professional football player who's only won like 3 games his entire career. It's a freaking brutal sport to like rationalize and square like a lifetime of effort going into like a handful of times where you actually get to stand on top of the podium and hold the trophy and be the champion. Like the drive to get back out there over and over and to keep the fight going is just like really, really tough and really mentally exhausting and physically exhausting too, that's the other thing I would say that I really learned is just being, even personally, like being on the road last year. I have a family, I have small children. I have a real job too, running the studio. Like it's exhausting being on the road, and being there filming. And I'm not even like hitting golf shots. I'm just like directing our teams and out there on the golf course, like following the action. It's really exhausting. And, it doesn't matter if you're staying in an Airbnb or a really nice hotel, like it's not your bed, you don't have your stuff, you're living out of a suitcase. And then as soon as it's over, you go to the next week and you're in a new bed in a new hotel, and you got to make sure you're eating well and you're making time for fitness and having a normal life and having friendships and staying in touch with your family. Like it's a really lonely life, and it can be really difficult, like life on the road.
Your passion really bleeds through, and I can see why, even though it was exhausting, you were there at so many of these different golf events and were so involved. We ask one last question of all of the people that we interview on the profile. So, in a few words, what does the word success mean to you?
I always think of success as like a direction. And I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I've never been a goal oriented person. To me,
Okay.
I think about like direction. And so I've always thought, to me, instead of a goal is something that you can reach. I always think about it as, am I going north? Like I have a direction I feel pulled towards. And I'm not trying to think about what I'm going to reach. I mean, you can never get to north. You're just going north. And for me, success is about calibrating. Like, am I still going north? And like I know I'm never going to reach it. If you ask me what's my goal, it's like, do I want to be like head of HBO one day or what? I don't know. Like I'm just going north, and I'm constantly checking against like, okay, am I still going north? And really, success for me is I'm still going north.